Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next round of astrology sessions where we're going to be dissecting charts a little bit more in depth this go around. And we have another lovely client here with us who is going to volunteer her chart, and we're just going to have a nice conversation about everything in and out of astrology. So let's go ahead and pull that up real fast. Okay. So it is very funny because in the last session that we recorded, the first three charts all had Virgo rising, and I don't plan these things. It just worked out that way. And so when I was calculating your chart, I was like, please don't let her be a Virgo rising. And I saw the Capricorn on the ascendant, and I'm like, oh, thank goodness we're breaking the channel. And then I see your Virgo moon up in the ninth, and I'm like, the theme continues. So it was just really funny, kind of side note for that. So, my dear, where would you like to start? What questions, comments, concerns do you have kind of right off the bat?
So one question is, right now, the chart that you are showing here is my planets right now?
No, this is your natal chart. So this is kind of like a snapshot of the sky at the time of your birth.
Okay, neat. Okay, so, well, I would like to know about my, natural gifts and talents.
Okay.
And yeah, like what aspects require more focus and what lesson do I need to focus on this lifetime?
Mm-hmm.
And do you want me to tell you my little questions?
Yeah, sure. The first couple we'll definitely go over because that's kind of part of the natural dialogue.
Another good question, I think, I don't know if this would help me to understand how I give and receive love.
Okay.
My relationship with money. Another thing that I read, it's about Saturn return.
Yes.
So I would like to know about that. And how can I create more success and flow in my career?
Okay, perfect. Yes. I love those last two very much for you because they're kind of at the heart of your chart a little bit, the career stuff and also the Saturn return, because Saturn plays a big role in your chart. So let's start there and we'll kind of work our way back.
Awesome.
Okay, so for everybody who's kind of watching, as well as yourself, Saturn returns are actually a really big deal in astrology. I actually have a Saturn tattoo on my pinky for when I got my first Saturn return, or I'll get a second one during my second Saturn return. It's a big rite of passage in the astrological community because Saturn rules time and the kind of maturity that only time can really give you. And so when Saturn returns to the exact place and degree that it was at the time of your birth, you're said to have kind of passed the trial of Saturn. And although Saturn is a very difficult planet in the chart, notoriously, Saturn returns can be times of really strong growth and times when a lot of that difficulty that Saturn brings in early life gets lessened or alleviated because your awareness of what those hardships are becomes clearer and easier to understand. As an example, Saturn is ruling a very important formation in your chart. Saturn is ruling the ascendant, but also the North Node, which is very close to the ascendant. So when we see Saturn ruling the ascendant, Saturn returns for you are going to be very much about the body. Saturn returns are going to be very much about health and wellness for you. A lot of your chart revolves around health and wellness, surprise, surprise, and you being involved in medicine. But the idea of Saturn ruling not just your body, but also your core personality. The ascendant is the point on the horizon at the time of your birth that dictates who you are when nobody else is looking. Yeah. And because Saturn rules that, every time that you have a Saturn return, it's this really strong maturation of self. But also why this is important for your chart specifically is because the North Node is here, and the North Node indicates life purpose. And when we see the North Node in the first house ruled by Saturn, all of this kind of piles into the meaning of you're here to really discover you and to understand who you are, what you stand for, what your guiding principles are, and to make sure that nobody pushes you around. Because there are several parts of your chart that are prone to being pushed around by people.
For sure. For sure.
Saturn is kind of here to be like, we need to develop a backbone. You know, we need to make sure that boundaries are tight, that we're able to communicate effectively, that Saturn in Gemini, what our needs are, and to make sure that not only other people understand that, but you understand that for yourself. And coming into clarity as a person is what a lot of your Saturn returns are going to be about. Saturn is currently in Aquarius, so we've got several years before we get another Saturn return. But that first Saturn return in Gemini, definitely one of the aspects it would have focused on is who you are in relation to your personal growth on a really, really massive scale.
And that period was like it's
sure. Let me pull up the exact date on that. So we're looking at 18 degrees of Gemini, one click in. Let's go ahead and pull that back. Playing with time. Okay. There we go. Let's see if we can narrow it down to the day. Yeah. So we're looking at about June 6th of 2002. So halfway through 2002. Okay. So out of curiosity, if you don't mind sharing, what was going on for you at that time?
I was recently married, so it was a big change in my life. So yeah, I moved from Mexico to the US, and yeah, it was a big change. It was all about finding myself, for sure. For sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Any other questions on the Saturn return aspect?
So the next one, when it's going to be, when is it?
Yep. Once again, fast forward. Or this time we're fast forwarding. There you are. 12, looking at 18. 15, 16, 17, and 18. So that will be July 18th of 2031.
Awesome. And how long does it take? Like, does it last?
This is a good question, and there's a lot of debate within the astrological community about that, because Saturn is one of the more slow-moving planets. And so what I tend to say is that when Saturn enters the sign that it's naturally in, so when it enters Gemini, that's when you really start to feel it. That's when you really start to notice it. And then it's kind of like the year of. So the year of 2031 in that case, because it kind of happens halfway through the year, it's really going to be that entire span, that entire period as it gets close and as it leaves that degree as well. Just kind of that ballpark period, especially intense around that particular time. But there are other transits that may be going on at that time that will heighten those lessons. And that may be kind of months before, months after. It's just at that and around that time, the closer we get to that degree, the more the intensity kind of aligns.
I see. Awesome.
Yeah.
I have another question. So, I'm not that, I don't have that much knowledge about astrology, just like the basics, but I always see, for example, about that I'm a Sagittarius, and then my ascendant is Capricorn,
Mm-hmm.
and then my moon is in Virgo, and then I think Venus is in Scorpio,
Mm-hmm.
and Mars is in Scorpio.
Yep.
And so what does that mean? Like, my ascendant is what you said, something about that it's who I am when I'm by myself or something like that.
Yeah, so this is a great time to give you the breakdown of the basics. And this is kind of, normally when I consult with a client, I really want to make sure that their burning questions are answered first. But at a certain point, going over the basics is always a good part of an astrology session. Even if you've heard it a million times before, when I get read, I always enjoy different astrologers kind of giving their view of what things look like. So it can be really helpful to start out with that sometimes. The way that I'll describe the sun, the moon, and the rising is like a car. It's like you're kind of taking a road trip, right? The sun is the car. It's the vehicle that you use to get from place to place. It is your outward persona. It is how you are perceived on the road of life. Yeah, and that is Sagittarius. People perceive you as fun, bubbly, positive, optimistic, a little bit foolish, but they love your sense of humor, your infectious smile, your charisma, all of those Sagittarian qualities. But the car's not going anywhere unless you give it gas, right? And the moon is like the gas. It's the emotional fuel that you use to get from point A to point B. The moon also dictates how many rest stops you need along the way. And your moon is in Virgo in the 9th house of spirituality, travel, higher education, and foreigners. And so a lot of what motivates you emotionally and a lot of what recharges your emotional batteries is going to revolve around 9th house topics of learning, constantly traveling and learning more about other cultures, interacting with those foreign cultures, and delving into spiritual pursuits.
I love that. I love that. Okay.
And then in addition to your car and the gas, you also have a travel companion. And the travel companion is the ascendant. It's the buddy that you bring along for the ride. And it's also your kind of co-pilot or your navigator. It's the person who takes over, when you're too tired. It's your default personality that is closest to who you are as a person. We could think of like you, the driver, being like the spirit behind all of these layers. And so the Capricorn ascendant is a very business-oriented sign. It's very focused on progress over time. It is one of the signs that's ruled by Saturn. It's just a little bit crotchety, but Saturn does get the job done. It can be a little bit cold, can be a little bit stern, but Capricorn is very determined. It knows what it wants and it goes for it. It's not above waiting for what it wants. It can be strategic when it wants to be. It can be very laid back when it wants to be. It is a grounded earth sign after all, but it is cardinal earth, which means it is a sign that is a leader. It's going to be a little bit ahead of the curve. It's going to take initiative. It's going to be a little bit more independent than the other signs, which maybe some of the other signs are definitely more codependent when compared to Capricorn.
So now that you're saying that, like, I've always feel like when I've heard of that my ascendant was Capricorn, I've always been like, I just don't feel like a Capricorn, at all. But I guess it's something that I need to develop in myself, or like.
So that kind of uncertainty is exactly what you're here to learn about. So when we say that the North Node is in the 1st house in Capricorn, close to the ascendant, the North Node indicates life purpose, and you are here to find out how to be that Capricornian part of you.
Okay, I see. It fits perfectly, because yes, I'm like, I don't feel like a Capricorn, so that's what I'm here for.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And something also to kind of keep in mind is that the sun in Sagittarius is a mutable sign, and it is mutable fire. So it's the fire that spreads, you know, the fire that changes, the fire that is constantly in flux. Your moon in Virgo is also mutable earth. It's the earth that moves, the earth that changes, the earth that is always in flux. And then Capricorn comes in, and Capricorn is the earth that moves forward. It is the earth with direction. It is the earth with purpose. It is the earth that changes of its own accord, not because of the whims of others. Like, it is a very self-directed energy. And that's different from your two other major placements. So it's definitely something that we'll need to work on. Even the Lord of your chart, Saturn, is in Gemini, another mutable sign. So we have all this mutability, but you're learning that cardinality. You're learning that leadership. You're learning stepping up to the plate. You're learning to be preemptive, to be more responsible for your own kind of skin in the game, as opposed to letting the other people or kind of the events surrounding you dictate what's happening next.
Wow. I love it. That gave me a lot of insight.
Good.
For sure.
I'm glad.
For sure.
Yeah, sometimes astrology is about just telling people what they want to hear in terms of like when transits are coming up, or answering questions like the Saturn return, you know, just kind of answering specific things that they're curious about. But in other cases, you know, it's kind of like an astrology 101. It's kind of decoding the messages within the natal chart.
Awesome.
Cool.
And so my North Node is in Capricorn, you said?
Yes.
Okay. So it's not only my ascendant, but that, or it's related. It's the same thing?
No, they're very different. It's not rare, but it is definitely unique that you have the North Node and the ascendant so close together.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. They're very close, and the ascendant is the quickest moving point in the chart. So just a couple minutes later, and it would actually exactly conjoin the North Node, but it would only stay that way for a couple minutes. And so the fact that they're so close together at the time of your birth, it's rather fated. It's rather auspicious.
Neat.
Mm-hmm.
Neat. And what about the Venus and Mars?
Yeah.
Scorpio.
So Venus and Mars can be thought of as the archetypes of your yin and your yang. You know, Mars is all about action, about moving forward, about initiating. Venus is more about indulgence and enjoyment and kind of self-love and finding beauty in the present instead of feeling the need to like go get it. And both of those planets being together is also a little bit more rare astrologically. And they're together in the 11th house of friendships, societal groups, and philanthropic efforts. So one of the things that I find really interesting is that Mars, the planet of action, is in your 11th house, making friendships a little bit easier to get. But what I also find interesting is that Scorpio is involved here. Venus specifically does not like to be in Scorpio because it opposes her natural sign of Taurus. She feels isolated in Scorpio. And Mars is kind of ruling over her, being a little bit overbearing. And so I think it's interesting that you have this planet of action and initiation and friendship. But the closer we look at this house and what friendships mean to you and what society means to you, as we peel back layers of the onion, there's kind of this overbearing quality to it. Like, you know, you seek out that comfort from other people and need to have other people around you, but then also feel uncomfortable with it. At the same time, it's kind of this juxtaposition a little bit. That makes sense?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Part of this, when we look at the grand scheme of the chart, may be due to the sun's placement. So we can look at each of these planets in the signs and houses. We can break it down into that minutia, but a lot of what astrology does is tell a story, right? It looks at the entire chart together and starts to synthesize this play, this drama, this novella, you know, that's a bunch of different moving pieces and how they're relating to each other. And one of the harder planetary positions in your chart is actually where your sun is located and who it's around. When we see the sun in the 12th house, this is one of the major indicators of self-esteem issues, because the 12th house is the house of hidden enemies. It's also the house of hospitalizations, karmic healing, a lot of very underworldy type topics. It's where the sun doesn't shine, you know, and to put your sun there is kind of like burying the sun or making it hidden. And so the light and the radiance that the sun normally has is harder to access from that place. And so one of the things that may be an issue with the friendships is this kind of self-esteem, like, you know, the need to go out and acquire these people, you know, that you have in your circles is almost a defense mechanism. It's not because you actually need to surround yourself with people, but it's because you know that you're stronger in a group. You know, the little fish is protected when it's amongst a lot of other little fish. And that's kind of the vibe that I'm getting from that Mars in Scorpio plus the sun in the 12th. Does that make sense?
That's very interesting, because I do tend to like isolate myself like a lot. I have very little friends, like very like good friends, right? And I'm not very like that social. So that is interesting. I was when you were talking about the sun being hidden, would that be something like shadow work that I need to do? Like more shadow work, or not really?
Yeah, so let's back up to the feedback in regards to Mars. And that could definitely be my faulty interpretation of that, because although Mars is the action-oriented sign, it's Mars in Scorpio, which is a more hidden, more isolative sign in general. Scorpio is fixed water, and what happens when water doesn't move is it turns to ice. It becomes frigid. And so I'll often talk about Scorpio being a little bit more isolating. And that's definitely a better interpretation of that, and especially if it makes sense to you from that perspective. But one of the things that I would kind of encourage you to examine is how you view your friends as helpful, but also trust issues amongst friends and your inner circle as well, because Mars can be very suspicious, and Venus can also be very suspicious as well. So that may be something to examine, especially with the sun kind of in the 12th.
I see.
It's kind of keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. That analogy.
Okay.
So the sun in Sagittarius in the 12th is a natal placement that diminishes the sun's ability to shine. So it's one of the placements that I look at to indicate a lack of self-confidence. That doesn't necessarily mean that you need to be doing a lot of shadow work. You know, everybody has a shadow that they need to connect with at some point in their lives. It's just a little bit more present because it's roped in your sun, the center of ego. And so getting exposed to that lack of self-esteem, you know, right off the bat is something that may trigger your shadow work a little bit early. But it doesn't mean that you have more karmic baggage than other people per se.
Okay. So it means that I definitely need to work on my self-esteem.
And this is the message of the whole chart, is you learning to be you.
True.
Right? So I think that honestly, like, although this is what I would call a little bit of a harder placement, it exactly fits what you're learning this go around. You know, how can you learn to be yourself if you have a sun that's shining bright and happy? You know, the only way you can really learn to be something is if you have to kind of fight for it, is if you really have to muster up the will and the courage and all of those things that are very difficult with the sun in the 12th in order to become that person, to stand up for what you believe in. So it's kind of like you put the carrot somewhere where you couldn't reach it. So throughout the life, you would constantly chase it.
Oh, I see. Awesome. For sure. For sure.
Yeah. In addition to that, another really interesting part of this dynamic is that we have Neptune conjoin the sun at 5 degrees. And Neptune is one of those outer planets that does tend to blur boundaries. It separates the veil between you and me, you know, me and you and the cashier at the grocery store, you and the apple on the aisle. Like, your ability to identify is kind of skewed, which again is part of your lesson. You kind of made it a little bit difficult for yourself from that perspective, because where you end and where somebody else begins is naturally weak. It's a little bit diffused. And so it's easier for you to pick up on other people's feelings, other people's thoughts, all of that perspective, but differentiating whose thoughts are whose and whose feelings are whose and why you're feeling what at any given time, Neptune tends to make that a little bit more chaotic.
Wow, totally. Yes, that's why I started learning Reiki and doing energy work, because I'm very empathic, and just like you said, I mean, it's difficult. It used to be even more difficult, because I was like, okay, so I'm having all these feelings, and is it me? Until I saw that I was picking up feelings from everybody else around me. Mm-hmm. And those boundaries things, it's so accurate. I have definitely issues with boundaries, for sure.
And I think that that's a really great example of why learning to be a Capricorn is so important, you know, because Capricorn is all about boundaries. It's the sign of boundaries. And so when we look at your chart and kind of look at that 12th house with the sun and Neptune together, a lot of people think that if you just have a lot of water placements in your chart, you're naturally empathic or naturally intuitive or naturally psychic. And to a degree, everybody is. You know, humans are wired for connection. And so it's not something that really, for those of us who have that blurred boundary state, you know, we'll tell people who identify as empaths all the time, like, it's not really a blessing, you know. But learning to be that steadfast person, that person who is able to feel, you know, and think and reach out to other people energetically in order to help them and assist them, that's definitely a huge part of who you are. But also understanding that there are lines that need to be drawn, there are walls that need to be put up, even if they're semi-permeable, you know, there is boundary work that needs to be done.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is really interesting is in regards to career and these boundary issues. So let's talk about that. The ruler of your chart is Saturn, because Saturn rules the sign of Capricorn on your ascendant. So where the ruler of the chart is located often talks about essential skills, who the person is, and what they value most. And for you, Saturn is in the 6th house of work, of health, and of pets. 3 things that seem a little bit unrelated, I know. But having the ruler of the chart in the 6th house, first and foremost, as somebody who has the ruler of the chart in the 6th house in their chart, it does make us just a little bit of a workaholic, throwing ourselves into what we do and over-identifying with what we do for a living is a really big part of having the ruler of the chart in the 6th. And that can be a relationship that needs, again, that boundary work, for sure.
Sure.
It can also indicate somebody who works in the field of healthcare or who works with animals or pets, but also somebody who works just for the sheer enjoyment of it. It's something that you naturally do well. You just have a really strong work ethic.
True. True.
So talk to me about the work equation. What's going on in that world?
Well, because I'm empathic, I started like a long time ago with energy work.
Mm-hmm.
And I just love to teach, energy work, to guide meditation groups, to do Reiki shares. And that is absolutely what I love to do because it helps me ground. It helps me be a channel. And I love the idea of helping other people connect with their higher selves and to ground. And it is so needed. And to, like you said, it's all about knowing myself. And part of meditating and energy work has helped me connect with myself and with who I am. And so that is absolutely what I love to do. And yeah, it's not work. It's, just what I love to do.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Yeah. The interesting thing about the sun in Sag and Neptune in the 12th in that kind of karmic healing house, the sun is also ruling your 8th house of entrepreneurship. So being an independent kind of provider of Reiki, having a side business where you offer that, as well as having a business where you work with people who need that kind of deep soul level healing is baked into the chart with the 8th and 12th house connection, for sure. But what Saturn talks about specifically is the 9 to 5, the day job.
That one is a challenge because I've done various things, nothing that I really love to do, but I'm an interpreter, Spanish, English, English, Spanish.
There it is. Yeah. So one of the things with Saturn and Gemini specifically is working as an interpreter, bridging the gap communication wise between people who find difficulty with language. Yeah, I adore that.
Yes. And it's not, I don't love it as much, but it is very rewarding to help people communicate, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. Also with the moon in the 9th house of foreigners, this is also one of the things that we'll see, people who work in translation or foreign services or things of that perspective. It really brings out the need for emotional connection to ethnicity in general in the chart. So I like that. Just as like a day job perspective, it definitely fits with a lot of your talents in the chart. But again, Saturn as ruler of your chart in the 6th house of work, there is a requirement for a 9 to 5 in the chart. So although entrepreneurship can be fun and it can satisfy a lot of what the ego needs in order to kind of pull itself out of that darkness, that 12th house, which can be a little bit muddy, right? A lot of what that Capricorn needs is a schedule. It needs to know where it's going to be, what is expected of it, when do we clock in, when do we clock out, when are we going to have lunch, when are we going to do the things, how much energy will we have at the end of the day to do free time stuff, all of those, when do we have to go to bed. Capricorn prefers that regimen. Capricorn prefers knowing when things are going to happen and why. And if that gets a little bit too out of control, then a lot of those earthy placements of the chart or even Saturn might get a little bit angry.
So if I'm not, because it's now that you're saying that, it's like I'm so against like a 9 to 5. Like I'm like, I don't like schedules. I don't like so that's something that I need to work.
Those are definitely your mutable placements talking, with the Virgo moon and the, Virgo moon, just how can I be of service? Let me, 1 o'clock in the morning, you call me. If it's a real emergency, I'm there. I'm the firefighter. I'm going to fix it. Sag sun, same thing, just put me where I'm going to be the most surrounded by the hustle and bustle, the energy of the job. But what Capricorn really needs is the predictable. Capricorn is the rule maker, and it really enjoys the expectation and knowing of, if I show up every day at this time for a certain amount of time, I will have success.
I see.
Yeah. As an example, with Reiki, the idea of daily practice.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So if I practice on myself every day for 30 minutes, in 10 years, I will have accumulated so many hours of hands-on healing experience, which will buff up my resume and allow me to have the self-confidence in myself as a healer.
Absolutely.
It's that kind of logic, that kind of A plus B equals C that we need to integrate more of into the charts, that your North Node is really asking you to develop.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
So even though the day job is not necessarily comfortable, treating some of your practice like a day job might make Saturn happy enough that it kind of creates that energy. As an example, there's a very different feeling, speaking from like a body work experience. When you're in school and you're studying these modalities and you're going out and you're working on friends and family, and you're seeing this person at like 7 o'clock on a weekday, and then you're seeing this person at like 10 a.m. on a Saturday when you're not working. And, there's a certain rush and exhilaration to that because you're pursuing a passion, right? But what Capricorn wants and what Saturn wants is to turn that into a 9 to 5. Saturn wants to say, look, in order to be called a quote unquote professional whatever, we need to have a clock in time and a clock out time. We need to have a set schedule during the week that pays the bills. And this is the requirement of our busyness. Our business acumen needs to have these boundaries, these set times, these predictable hours, so that we know we can be successful again over time, not just grabbing a gig here, grabbing a gig there, maybe I'm this, maybe I'm not. Capricorn wants those boundaries defined a little bit more.
I see. Yes, I can work on that for sure.
Yeah. Excellent.
Awesome.
You had mentioned at the beginning a really profound question that I think more people need to ask during their astrology readings, which is how you give and receive love. Yeah, and I adore that question so much. I think it really is a valuable thing to ask an astrologer for sure. And when we look at that, a lot of people would think we would look at Venus, but Venus doesn't have anything to do with your ability to give and receive love, because she does not rule your relationship house. She does rule your 5th house of intimacy and sexuality. So the idea of having sexual encounters with friends is definitely part of that dynamic, as the 5th house is ruled by Venus in the 11th. But in terms of love, we look to the heart, and we look to what the heart wants. The moon is actually your ruler of the 7th house as well. And so when it comes to love in general and intimacy in general, there has to be that emotional connection, which is why I think it's so important for you. But the moon loves, for you, receiving expanded love. And what I mean by that is people who want to be in an intimate relationship with you, that are willing to explore spirituality, explore travel in different places, teach you things, yeah, and not just be in a relationship, but be in a relationship that is oriented towards growth. Yeah. So how you give and receive love is often through mutual growth.
I love that.
Yeah.
Sure.
And that's how good astrology should feel, is like, oh yeah, that's it. You just said what I need.
For sure.
The one thing that can be a little bit tricky is a moon in Virgo is a little bit more prone to anxiety around the small details. So when it comes to finding that loving relationship, the one thing that we need to make sure we do not do is nitpick. Virgo loves to clean, loves to fix, love to make sure that things are organized. So if somebody is going out of their way to show you something, don't try to expose the falsehoods of that thing. You know, you have a pretty good lie detector as it is with that moon in Virgo. So we just want to make sure that we're not like, if a partner, if you're like studying a particular topic like Reiki, and your potential partner does the research, you know, says, oh, Reiki comes from Japan, I'm going to make a nice Japanese oriented meal, you know, and it doesn't necessarily come out the greatest. It's the thought that counts. It's the expansion that counts. It's the trying to transport you to another world. Don't let that Virgo moon interject a lot of its nitpickiness into that situation.
I see it. I see it. Yes. Yes. I love that example.
Yeah. Worst case scenario, you order sushi. The end.
I love that. Awesome.
Any other questions, comments, concerns, or things you wanted to delve into in the chart before we wrap up?
My relationship with money.
Oh, money, right. Totally forgot about that. So the second house is the house of finance, and the second house is also ruled by Capricorn. And when we look at Capricorn, again, in the sixth house of work, is money really comes to you when you have a predictable schedule. And it sounds pretty simple. Like, well, yeah, if you show up for work every day, you know, money will naturally flow. Not as easy with some of your mutable placements that want to be all over the place. You know, it's very different when you're trying to be an independent contractor and you have like 6 gigs booked over a couple days and then nothing for a week or two.